He has helped so many people, I have not got time to tell you how many. Thousands. Thousands. And it's by God's grace that I introduce you to Robert today.
My name is Robert, and I'm an addict. I happen to be a doctor, but that's just an accident. Dr. Silkworth, in the Big Book, wrote The Doctor's Opinion. And he made 6 points. The first was that other methods of treating alcoholism had not worked. They'd failed. But what he found was common to all the people who were recovering in Alcoholics Anonymous was that they reached out to help other people. That was the core principle. And he hoped that a new epoch would dawn. Well, here it is. And he said about the Big Book and the stories in it, he said, you may rely on anything they say about themselves. And that is really all we have the privilege and honour to do, is to talk about ourselves. Because we can, nowadays, say that with some insight, whereas previously in our using days, it was garbage. Well, mine was anyway. And so what he said was really pointing out the honesty of the program, the how, the honesty, open-mindedness and willingness, the HOW of recovery. And it begins with honesty, as we've all acknowledged. You know, my name is whatever, and I'm an addict. That is a fundamental principle of honesty, to acknowledge where we start. And from that, we can reach out to help other people, because we're not lecturing to them, we're joining in with them. Dr. Silkworth went on to say, the body of an alcoholic is as abnormal as his mind. Now, we all know about stinking thinking, because we've done it, up to here. But what he was saying was, there's something else happening in the body. And I don't think he's talking just about the liver. I think he's talking about what goes on between the ears. There's something wrong in there. And I should be developing that point. And what he said about the Big Book was, the subject is covered in masterly detail in the Big Book. What a lovely thing to say. Now, what I shall do is to talk about this doctor's opinion. And as Billy said, you know, I have no right to talk on behalf of anybody else, but I can give this doctor's opinion. Bill W. lived in hope that healthcare professionals would be interested in convincing testimony that was in the Big Book, and of doctors, such as Dr. Silkworth, who wrote the doctor's opinion in the Big Book, who had witnessed AA members return to health. Well, generally, doctors weren't interested. They didn't believe in convincing testimony. Let me read to you the reviews of the book of Alcoholics Anonymous that appeared shortly after it was published. The first one was in the Journal of the American Medical Association on 10th of April 1939. And it said, the book under review is a curious combination of organizing propaganda and religious exhortation. It is in no sense a scientific book, although it is introduced by a letter from a physician who claims to know some of the anonymous contributors, who claim to have been cured of addiction to alcohol and have joined together in an organisation which would save other addicts by a form of religious conversion. The one valid thing in the book is the recognition of the seriousness of addiction to alcohol. Other than this, the book has no scientific merit of interest. So then is the review in the American Journal of Nervous Mental Disorders in September 1940. And it said, "This big book, i.e. big in words, is a rambling sort of camp meeting confession of experience, told in the form of biographies of various alcoholics who had been to a certain institution and had previously recovered, or provisionally recovered, chiefly under the influence of the Big Brothers Get-Together spirit. Of the meaning of alcoholism, there is hardly a word." How damning can you get? My experience is that very little has changed in nearly 80 years since those reviews were written. In the UK today, medical students learn about the consequences of addiction, but they're taught nothing about the sense of inner emptiness that leads to it, or about the 12-step program that resolves it. Consequently, they're often unaware that addiction, in one form or another, underlies all the major killing diseases: cancer, nicotine addiction, sugar addiction, alcoholism, heart attacks, nicotine addiction, alcoholism, sugar addiction, cocaine, diabetes, sugar, alcohol, liver disease, alcohol, drugs, sugar, overdoses, drugs, alcohol. The major killing diseases are almost cornered in the market by people with alcoholism, drug addiction, eating disorders, and other forms of addictive behavior. If you add up all the deaths from the recreational drugs, in the UK it comes to 50 people a day. Alcohol kills 100 a day. Sugar kills 200 a day. Nicotine kills 300 a day. Well, the doctors may have some insights into the deaths, but they tend to have little insight into how we can treat those things before people die. And that's tragic. I remember a colleague telling me that it was wonderful work that I do, but it's not really medical. And I said, well, what would you rather I did? Would you like me to wait until someone's got cancer of the lung and only then say, well, I think you might consider giving up smoking? People who have addiction problems occupy 20% of all hospital beds. That's quite a thought. Add that up and see what it comes to in terms of expense. And 50% of the people seen in accident and emergency departments in the evenings and at weekends are there because of problems with alcohol and drugs. 50%, half of the people seen in A&E departments. It's incredible. And we also constitute the majority of suicides. People find that we can't live with our addiction, but we also can't live without it. So we top ourselves because we don't know what else to do. Well, these are the people I want to help and continue to help. I hope I've got another 20 years of active life. That's what I want to do with it. Doctors are trained to prescribe drugs. So they do. I am not criticizing doctors. Please hear me on that. Doctors do what they're trained to do. The General Medical Council is responsible for medical education. And we all know they're responsible for striking doctors off when they've done silly things. But the primary purpose of the GMC is to look at medical education. And I believe they have fundamentally failed in that. They don't get medical schools to teach about addiction and recovery. They just don't do that. And if I can contribute just a little bit to trying to persuading them to do things a little bit differently, then that will be a life well spent. So, doctors prescribe drugs because they have little or no training in psychological approaches. I had 6 years of undergraduate training, 3 at university and then 3 in medical school. And I'll tell you now just what I learnt about addiction and recovery. I learnt about the consequences, but what did I learn about the illness and how to recover it? So I'll tell you now. In 6 years, I was not given one lesson. Not one. And that is a disgrace and a tragedy. My postgraduate training has almost entirely been in America. I've been to the States 31 times, learning from wonderful people. Father Joseph Martin, who some of you will know very well through his chalk talk available on YouTube, is a personal friend. He died a couple of years ago and AA wept. I met Geraldine O. Delaney, G-O-D. And I thought I had. She was in her 90s. She was running a treatment program called Alina Lodge in a place called Little Hill in New Jersey. Her husband had set that up with her, but after 20 years, he decided he'd like to do a little bit of sensible drinking, and he died. And Geraldine continued. She knew Bill W. just as Father Martin did. He knew Bill W. They all knew Bill W. and Dr. Bob as personal friends. And I have been so privileged to meet them. I am just one handshake away, or 2 handshakes away, because they've shaken hands with Dr. Bob and Bill W., and I've shaken hands with them. So I'm just 2 handshakes away from them, and if you shake my hand afterwards, you're 3 handshakes away. I met Governor Hughes. I thought I'd met an angel. A lovely, lovely man. And let me tell you about him. He was standing for re-election, and his opponent went on television and said, "Your governor is a jailbird and he kept it from you." And Governor Hughes went on and said, "Well, actually it's true. I've been in prison many times in my youth. I'm an alcoholic, and I did the sort of thing that alcoholics do, and I finished up in prison. But I haven't been in the last 20 years. So his opponent came on the next week and said, "Your governor's grandson has just gone into rehab. He can't even look after his own children." And Governor Hughes came on and said, "There are many things that my grandson has done that I'm not happy about. But choosing to go in rehab, I'm bursting proud of him." He was re-elected by double the majority. I learned from the doctor at Hazelden in Minneapolis. He said, the reason we relapse is that some cars turn left. He says, you're driving along the road, it's a perfectly normal day, and suddenly the car turns left. And it stops outside the off license, and then you're in it, and then you're drinking a 6-pack. And where did that come from? And I think that's a wonderful insight, because I need an inoculation, a vaccination, a preventive medicine, because I am an addict. I always will be. And I therefore need to do something on a day-to-day basis to protect myself from relapse. I don't want to relapse and then say, "Oh dear, I'd rather say, oh dear, before I get there, and make sure I do the things, working the steps, going to meetings, having a sponsor and sponsees, staying abstinent right across the board. I want to do those things so that I don't have to say, oh dear, I've relapsed again, as many people do. And I see that as a tragedy. I've spoken at conferences all over the world, and I've been warmly received, except by my own profession. Isn't that odd? Yeah. Why is it so threatening? I'm not challenging anybody else. I'm not challenging other doctors. I'm just saying, this is my experience, and you might be interested. Well, 30 years ago, in my local AA meeting, we invited 60 doctors with food and wine supplied to a talk about treatment for alcoholism. None turned up. Not one. So we took away the food, but fortunately we bought the alcohol on sale or return, so we gave it back. We didn't think that having a monumental party would be quite the thing to do. 20 years ago, I was one of the speakers at a conference entitled Students Against Drugs. The Times newspaper promoted it on its front page. 800 chairs were put out. Not one person attended. Students are not against drugs. We're on our own in this fellowship. And that's where I like to be. It's where I hope to get well and stay well. I sometimes break my anonymity in order to encourage doctors and others to see that there's no shame in being an addict, even though I have considerable guilt over things I've done in the past, in my years of active addiction. I was still a using addict for 23 years of my married life. And when I was 23 years in recovery, I said to her, now, gotcha. It was meant as a joke, but it isn't really. It showed that I was aware of just how much I'd put Meg through over those 23 years, and how I really was doing my best to stay clean for longer than that. We're on our own in the fellowships, but that's a proper place to be. We understand each other, we speak the same language. In the last 33 years, I've learned through daily working of steps 10, 11 and 12 how to be the person I want to be rather than the idiot I was born to be. My wife Meg and I were together for 51 years. She worked with me, caring for family members. I didn't relapse when she died of a stroke, 3 weeks after I came out of bankruptcy caused by a fraud by my accountant. What's the point of relapsing? It only makes things worse. I was living in an old people's home because it was the only place I could live. We'd stayed with friends for 7 months. Living out of suitcases isn't very dignified. But I was visiting Canterbury, where my father had been a priest, and I went to the church, and the vicar said, well, I thought she was going to say a prayer, but she said something much more exciting than that. She said, well, we've got some almshouses, but there's a waiting list for a couple of years. Meg and I were in there within 3 weeks. And I said, but I haven't been to church for 30 years. And she said, oh, there are many ways of entering the kingdom of heaven. She knew the work that Meg and I did, and she appreciated it. Look at how many churches give us the rooms where we can meet. As Bill W. said, we should be grateful to our friends and know who our friends really are. I used to have 120 staff. Now I have none at all. I work on my own. And I'm very happy doing that. I'm seeing someone later on this evening. I've got to get back to London, so I'm on time. This is what my life is for, and I know this is your life as well. You do exactly what I do. That's how you are here. It's by reaching out to help others that you get the recovery that brings you here. Same as I get the recovery, such as it is, that brings me here. I'm as happy, enthusiastic, and as creative as I've ever been. Isn't that a lovely thing to say? I got into the recovery at the age of 47. Well, that shows just how stubborn I was. You could have diagnosed my addiction at the age of 7. I took another 40 years to get there. And so now I've been in recovery 33 years, and so those of you who are brilliant at maths can work out. I'm actually 81. I had my birthday last week. But as I said, I've got another 20 years to go. And then I'll start thinking about what I'll do next. You see, I'm still an addict. I wore specs for 50 years. And at the end of that time, I took them off, and you know what? I was still short-sighted. Well, that is not good. Well, I've been working the steps for 33 years, and I'm still an addict. They get me better by the grace of God, one day at a time. I'm never going to be cured. I'm always going to be an addict, and I'm okay with that. There's a very interesting piece of research on London taxi drivers. They did brain scans on them, and they found that the part of the brain concerned with orienteering, that's finding your way around, had grown from its customary size, about the size of a little fingernail, to the size of a thumbnail. It had actually grown from that to that. And then 2 years after they retired, it shrank back from the thumbnail to the little fingernail. We can change the physical structure of our brains by doing things on a day-to-day basis that enable it to do so. Sportsmen, have particularly good hand-eye coordination, and I'm sure that part of their brain enlarges. Stephen Hawking had a brain to die for, and look what he gave to everybody, despite all the tragic physical ailments that he suffered as a result of his ALS. There are people we can follow, there are people we can admire, the people we can say, yeah, I'd like a bit of that. And that's what I found when I was first in recovery. I remember I was in America at a conference, and a lady said to me, "Would you like to come to a meeting?" And she stuck out a stump. She'd got no arm below the elbow. And being English, I wanted to know what the proper etiquette was. I mean, do you shake the stump or do you offer the... Anyway, so she said, I said, well, what meeting? She said, Overeaters Anonymous. I thought, Overeaters Anonymous? What in God's name is that? But I wasn't doing anything, so I said, yeah, okay, fine. So I went to the meeting, and there were people praying for their daily abstinence, and they said the Lord's Prayer at the end. This was in Atlanta, Georgia, in the Bible Belt. So they do that. And Shirley said to me afterwards, how was that for you, Robert? And I said, well, fine. The next day, in the Radisson Hotel in Atlanta, Georgia, I was getting through my third plate of corned beef hash. An American served corned beef hash that size. And I said, I wonder if Shirley had a point. You see, we don't see ourselves very well. We can see other people, but we don't see ourselves. And so I went to a weekend of a workshop, and I was really blessed with somebody there who said, Robert, you need to give up sugar and white flour, because those are the addictive substances that make you crave with your eating disorder. And I didn't want to give up anything. And you've got to give up alcohol. Why? Because it works in the same place as sugar. I said, well, I've never had a problem with alcohol, not a major one. I know I've been drunk when I've been conducting an orchestra, and they didn't invite me back. But alcohol? Yeah. You want to take this seriously or not? Well, I was 47, and my wife had just recently been sitting in front of a divorce lawyer. And I went straight round to our GP and I said, what's the matter with Meg? As we do. And he said, Robert, it's not Meg, it's you. And I said, but I educate the children, I pay the mortgage. Robert, it's you. And I just didn't see it. But when I learned in that convention that I did have a problem and I needed to do something about it, I said, okay, I'll give it a go. And so I came back to London and I looked up where to find on eating disorders. My weight used to vary by 50 pounds. I'd go from 11.5 stone to 15.5 stone and then back down and then back up again and down again. And I was always on a diet and they never worked and so on and so on. You know the story. It's the same with any addiction. So that was the first one I looked at. And I went to this meeting in Earl's Court. And there were 2 young girls there in their 20s. And they started off the meeting by saying, let's have a group conscience. Well, I had no idea what a group conscience was. And they said, we need a secretary. And it had been suggested to me that I should volunteer for anything. So I thought that being the secretary meant I kept the minutes or something like that. And so in my very first meeting, I was made secretary. And the next week, neither of the other 2 turned up. But they'd shown me where the literature was, so I got it out, and I read the preamble. I invited myself to give the chair, and I gave the chair. I thanked myself and responded to it. I read the Serenity Prayer, I put £1 in the pot, gave myself a hug, and went home. And I've been coming ever since. And a young girl called Rebecca came to me in my medical practice and said, would you let me know if these drugs are mood altering? And she showed me a prescription that another doctor had written. I said, what on earth does mood altering mean? She says, well, I'm a recovering addict, and so I always be very careful that I don't have mood altering drugs. And I said, what on earth is a recovering addict? She said, well, I'm a member of Narcotics Anonymous. I said, what do? Do you hold hands under Waterloo Bridge or something? And she said, very funny. Have you ever been to a meeting of NA? And I said, no, should I? She said, well, yes, if you've got attitudes like that, you should. So I went there, and there was Girard, and some of you will know Girard. My name is Girard, and I'm an addict. You know him, don't you, Nick? Yeah, lovely man. But there were 3 patients of mine. And they said, hello, Robert. I said, no. No, I'm just here to find out. Yeah, so were we. So I said, well, tell me, I'm your GP. Why didn't you tell me about the most important thing about you if you've got addiction problems? And they said, Robert, we can't tell you, you're a doctor. Just listen to that. We can't tell you, you're a doctor. And so I made up my mind to be the sort of doctor they could tell. In the section of the big book entitled The Doctor's Opinion, it says, we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe that the body of an alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. It did not satisfy us to be told that we couldn't control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, and that we were in full flight from reality, or were outright mental defectives. These things were true to some extent, in fact to a considerable extent with some of us. But we're sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. Dr. Silkworth believed that alcoholics have an allergy to alcohol, coupled with a mental obsession. And you read it yourselves, you remember that. Well, some Japanese people get facial flushing. They go bright pink, which is quite tricky for someone who's Japanese. That's a genuine physical allergy to alcohol. Well, I don't get that. I just go horizontal. And I lose sight of the damage that I and my friends and my family and my colleagues get when I use addictive substances and processes. Once I start, I don't know how to stop. I lose control. And in that sense, I react badly to mood-altering substances and processes, just as if I was allergic to them. Dr. Silkworth describes several different types of alcoholic. I think all addicts, as with all people who are short-sighted, have the same condition to a different degree. And our neurotransmission disease, as I call it, may present itself in several ways. As I said, I have a whole bunch of addictive outlets. If one of them isn't available and doesn't work, I'll try another one. I've got several in reserve. And for this reason, I very much believe the warning given in the preamble to meetings of CA. I need to be abstinent from all addictive substances and processes. I can't afford to pick and choose. I can't afford it. I'm an addict by nature. I've got to find a way of living the life of my dreams without them becoming nightmares. I thought, I was okay. But I wasn't. Everybody else knew that, but I didn't. And so I had to listen. And I find that difficult, partly because I'm a doctor. We're not taught to listen, we're taught to prescribe. If you really want help for people who are desperate, go to the Salvation Army. They are God's people. They know how to help the people who are absolutely destitute. In my experience, doctors don't. And it's not because we're too busy. It's because we don't know how. And that's a tragedy of medical education. I find the most damaging of all my addictive outlets is compulsive helping. Doing too much for other people and belittling them and patronizing them in the process. And not doing enough to protect myself. Compulsive helpers like me keep other people's addiction ticking over. In this way, as family members or friends or professionals of one kind or another, we cause immense damage to other people and to our society. I know that's not a popular thing to say, but it's been my observation. I don't like the term codependency because it means so many different things. It means, my father was an addict, it means I was sexually abused in childhood, it means I'm married to an addict, it means so many different things, it actually means nothing at all. Whereas the acknowledgement that I, Robert, am a compulsive helper, that's exactly like acknowledging that I'm an addict. It puts the responsibility right here, and I have to do something about it. I'm too strong-willed and determined. That's my problem. People imagine that addicts like us are weak-willed. We're not. We're far too strong-willed. Dr. Silkworth learned from his patients just as I've learned from mine. He described his meeting with one of them in this way. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with others. And this has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and women and their families. Wow, I'll say, look where the anonymous fellowships are now, nearly 80 years since he wrote that letter. And look where you and I are right now in this convention. We have been given a priceless gift that has saved our lives. And all we have to do to stay that way is to hand on that priceless gift to someone else. Many of my contemporaries are dead. I should be so lucky to be here. Many of your friends and family members may have died from this illness, neurotransmission disease. But by the grace of God, as each of us one understands God, you and I are very much alive. What a privilege that is. By working the 12-step program each day, I'm living my life to the full. And I hope you'll join me. Thank you. Questions. We've got time for questions here. I'd just like to talk a bit about my idea of neurotransmission disease. I think that what we've got is a defect in the way one neuron talks to another. If you put 6 units of mood in this side, only 5 units of mood come out the other side. I think that's what all of us have of any addiction. We're -1. And so the sensible thing to do is to go looking for +1. And we discover alcohol works, nicotine works, cocaine works, sugar works, gambling works. Rhubarb doesn't. It has other effects. So we find out for ourselves what works. And once we find out what works, why should we ever give it up? And the answer is, because it's the wrong treatment. One of the great tragedies is the word alcoholism. It's naming the illness after one of its treatments. You wouldn't call a sore throat penicillinism. And I believe that we could be really helped by calling all addiction neurotransmission deficiency. I think that's what we've got. There's something wrong in the neurotransmission. One of my grandchildren has Kabuki syndrome, which is as rare as chickens growing teeth. And she's got the mental capacity of someone with Down syndrome. Her joints will go sideways as well as backwards and forwards. She's deaf, she's got cataracts, she's got mastoidioblastosis, which is the opposite of diabetes. She's got a fistful, poor love. But she's happy. Put her in a swimming pool on a trampoline and she's jumping around. I'm in touch with her every single night, because she sends me from Australia a picture of herself with a horse or in the pool, and all I have to say is, "Hi, Ali." And she says, "Hi, Grandpa." That is lovely. Knowing that I can contribute in just a tiny way, right across the globe, to someone who was born with real difficulties. But also I identify with that. So will we. Kabuki syndrome is understood by doctors who specialize in that sort of thing. Addiction is not. But we understand each other. And if we can think of it in terms of neurotransmission disease, it takes away the stigma, it takes away the blame and the self-pity and all the garbage. And we can see that we've got a problem and we know how to treat it. Isn't that lovely? So that's something I hope to contribute alongside what Dr. Silkworth gave to me. Now, questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for your talk.
Do you want to come up here?
My name's Paul, I'm an addict.
Hi, Paul.
I think I've got neurotransmission disease. My question,
Yep.
when I first went through the doctor's opinion, I fully identified with the mental obsession and the physical allergy. And when the doctor wrote his opinion, he called it a phenomenon of craving. One of the things I've battled with over the years is the fact that I believe it's not a phenomenon anymore. I believe we understand why the craving happens. And some of the information that I've received, it's led me to believe that the way the craving happens in an alcoholic and the way it happens in an addict is created differently. When I first learned about it, I thought about enzymes and a substance called acetaldehyde, which had to do with the liver and the pancreas. But then I couldn't work out why I had the same craving with cocaine. And then I started to learn about neuroscience. And I wondered, can you give us your definition of why the allergy happens, the phenomenon of craving?
Did you learn about thick, THIQ, tetrahydroisoquinoline? That was all the rage about 15, 20 years ago. That was the solution to everything. And, you know, we get given these magic fixes, one after another, of how we can just understand all the brain hormones, the pheromones. It's not a brain disease in that sense. That's the consequence of the neurotransmission disease. If I feel -1, I must find a +1, otherwise I'll die. And I do. But it's the wrong +1 that I tended to find. Now I found the right one. It's called reaching out to somebody else anonymously. So I don't think there's anything to be gained from going further into all the neuroscience as such. I don't think it's helpful. I think it's semantics. I think it's words. I go to the Evolution of Psychotherapy conference in Anaheim in California. They hold it every 4 years. And I heard Dr. Daniel Siegel talking about mindfulness. And he spoke for over 2 hours without taking a breath. And it was fascinating and irrelevant. I also remember the lady who set up cognitive dialectical therapy, and she said, for addiction, we have a 95% recovery rate. And I thought, wow, the best I've ever known in a rehab is about 60%. So she's got something absolutely incredible. Or not. Another question. Anyone? Yep.
Right, Tom. I'm scared of getting beaten down in terms of response. Give us a hug, Robert. Thank you for sharing with you, man. That was beautiful. Sorry, you've spoken really eloquently about Dr. Silkworth and the input that he kind of has given us in terms of AA about the physical problem, but Dr. Silkworth didn't know what the solution was. Have you got any thoughts on Dr. Young's input in terms of the vital spiritual experience and the significance of that, and also, I guess, the legacy of the impact that Jung has had on AA and on us, really?
This is Dr. Carl Jung. The old-timers were wondering how on earth they're going to stay clean. Surely they should find out from psychologists, psychiatrists, and all the others as to what they needed to do. And AA number 3 went across to see Dr. Carl Jung, the eminent psychologist. And Carl Jung said, the only thing I know that alcoholics can do to get themselves better is to have a spiritual awakening. That's where that phrase comes from. It comes from Carl Jung. And he said, and the principle of that is when they take their minds off themselves and reach out to help other people. And so Carl Jung really had the basic idea that Dr. Bob and Bill W. took up with and ran with. We have an immense debt of gratitude to him. Now, I've studied Jungian psychotherapy to some extent, I've not done the full boiling, but I've read the stuff. And it's beautiful. And I've read Freud, and it's weird. But there are people who really credit Freud, and he does deserve the credit of starting the whole idea of mental problems being an illness rather than a depravity and stupidity and a weakness. So Freud does deserve the credit. But Carl Jung was a giant, and I've mentioned giants. We are so privileged to have had what we've been given. And you'll hear in the meetings, all you need to do, don't drink and go to meetings. I know a lot of people who don't drink and they go to meetings and their lives are dreadful. They're resentful, they're bitter, they can't stop talking about how difficult life is with their wives or husbands or whatever. They moan and groan. If that's recovery, I don't want it. I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying that's part of the journey. But the journey I want to follow is the journey that Carl Jung set up for us. Thank you. Yes.
I'm in a rehab.
Yeah.
I'm in a rehab, and I woke up that I'd actually used sweating, and I was relieved when I woke up. I said to my friend, I'm in trouble, because I actually thought I used, so I'm thinking what triggered that off, and is it a sign that I'm going to relapse again? Or it's kind of bothering.
Thank you. That's a very brave question. You're being honest, sharing your experience, and asking a question. And if we can all do that, we'll get well and stay well. Let's be honest, share our experience, and then ask questions rather than tell everybody everything. So, as far as, being in a rehab is concerned, we don't get better in rehab. Let me say that again. If there are people in rehab here, either as counsellors or specialists of one kind or another, we don't get better in the rehab. Rehabs help a larger number of people to get well in the fellowships than would otherwise do so. The recovery rate of Alcoholics Anonymous is about 30%. A decent rehab should be able to get about 60% to stick in AA. The recovery rate of Narcotics Anonymous is 5 to 10%. In rehab, again, it should get up to about 60%, provided you give them the information that enables them to stick in the rehab and stick in the fellowships. The recovery rate in Overeaters Anonymous is probably 0, because they define recovery as being abstaining from compulsive overeating. And you say, but how do I abstain from compulsive overeating? They say, well, you abstain from compulsive overeating. Yes, but how? Well, you abstain from compulsive... I was so lucky to be told that sugar and white flour were the addictive substances. I avoid taking extra spices. I don't smother my food in salt and pepper and ketchup and so on, because that's just damaging my taste buds. I want to enjoy the food. But then I was told I had to have normal portion sizes. What on earth is a normal portion size? I've never had in my life. My friend Luca describes 2 peas and a carrot as a feast, because he's anorexic. He came to me as a joke, played on me by a consultant psychiatrist. See if you can do that. See if you can get him well. I said, thank you. Luca's been my sponsee for the last 16 years. I had a message from him this morning. He writes a little cartoon saying, be so happy. I've never known anybody so happy. He's peculiar, he's strange, he's weird. But he's utterly lovely. So, when we're in rehab, we have an opportunity to start the journey. And that's what the staff should be really helping you with, and I'm sure they are. A dream is a dream. You know, whatever dream, that's just something that happens. We don't have to act on it. And if I see a beautiful girl in the street outside my office, I can say, oh, yay. That is perfectly normal and healthy. What I don't do is run down the stairs and out into the street and say, hey, would you? I'm responsible for my actions. I can't control the thoughts that come into my head from nowhere. And the feelings that I have, I should be so lucky to have the feelings. I work in a feeling business. We have a feeling illness and it needs a feeling recovery. We don't get better, in my view, with cognitive behavioral therapy or rational emotive behavior therapy or smart recovery. We get better with EMDR, NLP, psychodrama, all the feeling therapies. Because a feeling illness needs a feeling therapy. There's nothing wrong with my thinking brain, damn it, except for the stinking thinking. But my feeling brain is an utter and complete disaster. And this is where I need to sort myself out, with your help, on a continuing basis. I've just made a decision of what I'm going to do for the next 20 years. I'm going to write musicals. How about that? You'd support me in that? I'll tell you what's behind it. At school, I said, I'd like to be a professional musician. And they said, we don't teach music, it's for homosexuals. That's honest, God's truth, that's what they said. So I was not allowed to study music. I then subsequently entered myself for a singing scholarship, and I got one. And the head of the music said, you can't sing a note. That was true, but I managed somehow to fluke it, and I got in. And so when I went up to university, as a singer, you can read any subject you like. And so I said, I'll read music. And they said, fine. And 1 week later they said, you can't, you're not good enough. And I said, well, I've come here to learn. And they said, you're too far behind. We can't teach you. So I did something else. I became a doctor. And I've been very happy as a doctor. And I've done that. But now I want to go back to my first love and be a musician. I'm going to write musicals. Thank you. Another question? How are we doing for time, Ian?
5 minutes?
5 minutes. Okay, last 5 minutes. Who's got a question? Yep.
I don't know if it's a silly question, but you're saying about giving up sugar and flour. But obviously, I've quit smoking and obviously the drink and drugs. But how do I stop like eating loads and loads of biscuits at meetings? Just filling myself full of junk food, you know?
Let me just emphasize, I don't judge anybody else's recovery, of course I don't. Other people have every right to do what they find works for them. What I found was that I simply put down one addiction and picked up another. I put down the sugar, I picked up the nicotine. I put down the nicotine, I picked up the alcohol. I put down the alcohol, and so on. I got sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so I found I needed to look at all my addictive behavior, and Cocaine Anonymous says exactly the same. That's why I find myself so comfortable in CA. I love CA. It works for me. And how do I deal with cravings? I'll tell you the God's honest truth. I don't get them. I have no cravings whatever. You remember what I said about the London taxi drivers? Through my recovery, I've changed the recovery part of my brain from a little fingernail to a thumbnail. And this is why we don't relapse immediately when we start working the steps or going to meetings. It takes time for that to go back to this, and then down we go. So I think we need to be aware that people in early recovery, or when they put down one substance, will inevitably crave for something. Come on, come on, come on. You know, you've heard the stories of addictive disease doing press-ups in the waiting room, or you've heard the analogy of the sleeping tiger just waiting to grab us again. All of that is true, but what I hope to give you is the sense that cravings are simply part of the withdrawal symptoms of early recovery from any particular addiction. I have no cravings whatever. That's the gift that I've been given by Dr. Silkworth and others, and it's the gift I would love to give to you. Thank you very much.